My name is Fergus Connolly, and I'm introducing Cody Royle, an amazing Australian Canadian who has written his first book was called Where Others Won't. His second one, called The Tough Stuff, is coming out January 14th.
Dr. Fergus Connolly is an icon of high-performance sport, having worked in every major ball sport around the world. And his latest book is the Happiness Handbook.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today, I'm honoured to be speaking with Cody Royle and Fergus Connolly. Guys, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show.
Dan, thank you very much for having me. Cody, great to be chatting with you again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to adding a third party to our shows that we did earlier, and that's Dan. So are you looping us in, or are we looping you in, Dan? How is this? How do you see this working?
I'll take the lead. I'm thinking it's got a real jokey feel, in as much as there's an Englishman, an Aussie, and an Irishman doing a podcast episode, and then you can fill in the joke.
Yeah, an Englishman, an Aussie, and an Irishman walk into a bar. That's a whole other story.
I thought we might start by playing on the whole nationality thing. We're talking about differences in attitudes towards sport globally across the world. Cody, you being in North America, Canada. Fergus, you being in North America from Ireland. Just wanted to talk about differences in attitude from a participative perspective and maybe from a competitive perspective. And if you've noticed any differences yourself, I'm sure there's loads. Cody, why don't we start with you? Is there huge differences in terms of, attitudes towards participation, towards competing in Canada as compared to Australia?
Yes, huge.
Really?
At all levels, I would say. And the easiest one to identify for me has just been the post-university landscape in North America, in that essentially club level or local level or suburban level sport doesn't exist in adulthood. And so participation essentially drops off, which for an Australian coming from our suburban landscape, where you play netball, you play Aussie rules, you play rugby, you play cricket, through your adulthood, with people from your suburb, and there's money involved, and there's social, community aspect in that you go and spend your Saturday evenings, in the club rooms with your friends. Essentially, none of that exists in North America, but in Canada in general. So that is bizarre to me, because it is literally baked into the social fabric of Australia, but doesn't exist over here. And so, from an Aussie rules perspective in Canada, trying to replicate that is quite difficult. But for a lot of the successful club teams that filter up into my national team, they do get that social elements right. They find ways to have those, the beers in the club rooms, or whatever the equivalent is. And actually, so it's a sport, but it's also a social activity. And then, when you look at the performance programs, on top of participation, there's some similarities there. I thought that Aussie rules was a religion, coming from Melbourne, and it quite literally is, in that, people don't care to ask you what denomination you are. They care what Aussie rules team you barrack for in Melbourne. And then to get over here and see, particularly within Canada, the way that hockey drives, almost the happiness levels of a whole country, like it does here, ice hockey. It was really, really interesting. The joke is that, it's on the money. But like there's there's episodes and episodes in How I Met Your Mother about about Canada and some of the nuances of hockey, and they're kind of making light of them and joking about them, but literally the people playing pond hockey is on the $5 bill, and they treat it very seriously, but it also kind of dictates the mood of the country. So yeah, a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences when you look at the kind of performance versus the suburban aspect of them. But sport mad regardless over here.
Fergus, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's something that I noticed early on moving, working in different countries, just the difference in the cultural influence. And it is very, very interesting, and it's very different. I think the easiest way to describe it is that, sport is, the sport that we watch is a business. It's the entertainment business. And, I've said this for many, many years. The most advanced sport in the world is WWE wrestling, because it has recognized early on that sport is entertainment and only entertainment. So any of the top pro sports, really, the amount of performance and degree of performance is startlingly poor when you compare it to the entertainment factor. I think that is similar across other countries, but to a lesser degree. And I remember speaking in Australia actually many years ago to the AFL Coaches Association and making the point that, AFL being the second greatest field sport in the world after Gaelic football, that they had, but my point to them was that in countries like Canada with ice hockey, AFL in Australia, Gaelic football, hurling in Ireland, and to be honest, soccer in the UK, these are fundamental threads in the fabric of society. They're not, nor should they ever become, purely businesses. And I think there's a danger that, because then it ends up, like Cody said, where, there is no such thing as, or there's very little recreational sport or team sport or a group involvement. And from a societal point of view, that is not necessarily a positive. Because if you look at the role of sport in society, is to develop young people for life. That's what its role is, to teach us lessons for life. Because most of us will never get to play pro, and in fact, that was never the goal. Go back to ancient Greeks, and that's why you take your son or your daughter to play sport, is to teach them lessons, winning and losing, how to overcome failure, struggles, be part of a team, work on your own, improve, take instruction, all of those things. It's not to make money, but I think if you look at the NFL, NBA, they're primarily 32 franchises owned by billionaires to make money. They're not to feed back into grassroots sport. So I think culturally in every nation, sport plays a very, very different role.
As you guys were speaking, there was two contrasting approaches that I kind of wrote down here: a way to life and a way to entertain, which seems to be possibly the more of a North American approach. A way to life, as in, as you said there, Fergus, developing the skills to life. It's a way to have a life, to perhaps improve the quality of your life. And then a way to entertain the public. In contrast, as you were saying, Cody, within society in Australia, it's a way of life and it's a way of entertaining. It's a way of entertaining people, of entertaining groups. It's being part of it. There seems to be a real dichotomy there: a way of entertaining, a way of life, a way to entertain. Thoughts on that, Codes?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And it's interesting, though, because even amongst that line of thinking is that when you present the kind of way of life that we have from Australia or from Ireland to North Americans, they actually take it up quite quickly. So there is actually demand for that kind of way of life, and I've seen it happen. I've played in the GAA community over here in Canada. I've started and been a part of the AFL community here, where we bring those grassroots factors to North Americans, and they're the ones that end up driving it. It's not the expat communities. It's the Canadians that take that on board and say this social element that is still teaching us lessons, post childhood. It's teaching us lessons in the world and how we think about the world in adulthood as well. There is actually demand for that. There's just no supply of it in North America. So I find that interesting as well, in that, when presented with those opportunities, the North Americans will take them up. And, a simple way of looking at it is just even the growth of Aussie rules football in North America. There are teams popping up everywhere across America and Canada. And I think it's due to this social element rather than the entertainment element.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a fundamental human desire to be part of something, to be part of a tribe, to be part of a team, to struggle and suffer. And I think that's why so many people actually start playing sport at a young age and want to be part of it. It's, that love of the game and love of everything that a game, and I don't actually care what the sport is that people play, but it serves, a base human desire to be part of something and to share with people. But then it's interesting as you develop along that pathway, it does disappear in certain communities, and not for the better necessarily.
Interesting. And to
well, sorry, can I just mention one other major factor as well? And this is unusual in particularly in North America. The university system, you go to university to get a degree. You don't go on a scholarship to play football or to play basketball. Like, in the UK, in Australia and Ireland, you go and if you play, a little bit of college sport, brilliant. But you've got your own, like, each team has its academy, like, soccer academies have their own academies. But here it's a completely different thing. So the university program are feeder systems for pro teams who don't actually have to invest in them. That is a major factor. That's a huge factor in sports. So you don't have these local teams like when you were growing up. You might have gone to a school, but then you went to a different club in the evening, and so you were mixing with different groups and different people. I think that's a huge factor as well, because you're not just in the one echo chamber. You might play a little bit of school, but then you've got your local teams, and you're playing with lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds in those local teams. Your school might be different and whatever, but that's a really, really positive element advantage that Europe, Australia, and other countries have over the US, because of the college sporting system. It's not sport. It's an industry. It's a sporting industry in itself, and it doesn't lend to a more positive impact on society, on the youth themselves, because it becomes so elitist and special at such a young age.
There's certainly loads of cultural differences, isn't there? And in terms of differences, and gently throwing a grenade into the room and then running away like a cowardly Englishman, you boldly claimed, Fergus, a few minutes ago that Gaelic football is far better than Aussie rules football. So I'd love to hear in around about a minute why that is the case, and then we can have a slight rebuttal maybe from Cody. Go for it.
No, I just said it. I just said Aussie. To be honest with you, like the way that I described this, and this is seriously. No,
he's scrambling already. Listen to him. He's scrambling. I actually think let's just solve this now. I actually think hurling is better than all of them.
Cody's kicking for touch already, but no, but this is all joking aside. If you had, and this is the way that I look at it, if you want to take your argument or take any argument, and you want to really try and stress it, one of the things I often do is I imagine, okay, if I had an island of 100,000 people, and I had to pick one sport from scratch, a nation, and I had to pick a sport that I wanted everybody to play, you'd pick one that had lots of running in it, had that wasn't as physical, for example, perhaps as American football or rugby, one that has a high skill level, speed level, builds endurance, strength, speed, agility. Everybody can play in, and it caters for all sizes. And you would end up with a sport very similar to Gaelic football or Aussie rules. And so for me, that's why I think those two sports, and hurling, but particularly those two sports, Gaelic football and Australian rules, are an ideal sport that anybody can play anywhere, anytime. And that's why, and I think the marginal difference between it and soccer is that it includes that upper body element and more physical element. That's so just in terms of picking or designing a sport for a nation, again, going back to this basic principle that the role of sport is to teach young people lessons for life and physical health and wellness. I think if you were to design a sport, you'd come up with something very, very similar to the qualities that both of those sports develop in people. That's really where I'm coming from with that half joking comment.
Well, using that analogy, if you've got about 100,000 people left on Earth, you wouldn't pick golf because everybody would kill each other, I reckon, by the end of the day.
Yeah, but when you think about when you go back to the ancient Greeks and to the Spartans, to Romans, that sport was developed to, these sporting tests were developed to train young men for lots of different professions, but primarily for war. Well, if you were to take that logic further, if you were made king of an island of 100,000 people or 1 million people, what sport would you design for them? You'd come up with a sport, like I said, that would try and encompass and develop all of those kinds of qualities. Well, and that's what you'd end up with a sport, I think, similar to that.
Cody.
Well, to put a bow on this and to add in some, taper our imperialism collectively, is a lot of people in talking, Gaelic football and Aussie rules, a lot of people think that Aussie rules is a derivative of Gaelic football. They're very similar. Obviously, most of the prisoners that were sent to our island by the British were Irish people. And so people make those links. But in actual fact, our game, Aussie rules, is derived from an Aboriginal Australian game called Man Grook, which predates the white man. So talking of, societies coming up with games that, encompass all these different things, our game is derived actually from an Aboriginal Australian game. So there you go. Literally people on an island putting together a game that serves the community. You've got Man Grook, and it ends up becoming Aussie rules. And it doesn't need to be the best in the world, Dan. We don't need to rank these. I think they're all great games. And hurling, and like I said, hurling might actually be the best one out of all of them. Fantastic game if you get an opportunity to sit down and watch some hurling, especially at the top level. Absolutely spectacular.
And again, to your point, Cody, it's not like taking the nationalist, and again, it's in jest. But again, going back to you want kids to play a sport, and individual sports developing can be wonderfully helpful, and then there's a wonderful benefit, to team sports, which I actually think even today now, more so with social media and people becoming more isolated. I think team sports are probably more important now than ever before, particularly for young people finding, and being around lots of different backgrounds and personalities. The benefit of it is incredible.
Well, you've taken us back in time. You've taken us back to the Spartan era. You've taken us back to pre-Captain Cook Australia. So we're going back in time, and perhaps to go to predate Enlightenment and civilization. Let's talk about your show. Was it Royle and Connolly or Connolly and Royle? Who had the headliner there?
Oh, definitely Cody. Cody was the driving force.
It was Royle and Connolly?
Yeah, absolutely. Cody.
I think it was Royle and Connolly.
No, Cody has to take the credit.
Well, you guys got together over the summer 2020, tumultuous period. You eased everybody's nerves and gave them a cerebral offering. Was it day by day, week by week? You just basically did a whole pile of podcast episodes.
Yeah, we did. Well, they were live Zoom webinars.
How many do we do in the end?
We did about, I think it was 38 or 39 in the initial stages, and then we did a second week. So we probably got up to around 45 in total. But yeah, the idea, Dan, just to kind of backtrack, was, Fergus and I were catching up regularly anyway, and having conversations about leadership and coaching, and we're talking about doing something together. Could we have an educational offering together, or put something together from video perspective? And then when COVID hit, we just thought, well, why don't we open this up for people? And so, yeah, it was a daily Zoom, very early for Fergus on the West Coast. It was perfectly timed for me here on the cushy East Coast, where we get all of the great time zone advantages. But yeah, about over a month, every day, tune in for an hour, and we just talked about a bunch of different topics. And it really started with, as you said, Dan, trying to calm people's nerves. It's okay, how can we attack this new world that we're walking into? And yeah, we were really lucky that it flew. We had, I think 1,400 people sign up. There were well over 100 on just about every call that we did, and it gave people an opportunity to build community as well. So as everyone was going into isolation, it was meeting new people and building coaching communities, which often don't have an opportunity or the time to be able to come together and collectively take a deep breath and a breath out and learn together. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work, don't get me wrong, and a lot of early mornings, particularly for Fergus, like I said. But
to be fair, he's an early riser. I remember when we were trying to organise my podcast episode with Fergus, and he suggested a time, and I was like, "But that's about 4 a.m. for you," and he was like, "Yeah, that's lunchtime for me. It's all cool." So,
yeah, he's already walked around the block about 10 times by 4 a.m. and sent me a bunch of texts, whatever's on his mind, and voice notes and stuff. So yeah, it's about lunchtime.
It was a good test of endurance, I'll be honest. Yeah, but it was just it was a random idea. This COVID thing kicks in, and of course, I'm thinking this will be 2 weeks, and we'll crack this out, and everything will be back to normal. Freaking 4 weeks later, whatever it was, we're still going. Oh man, it was, but it was good. I was actually, Cody, I was almost going to reach out to you and say, hey, let's do a post-election special as well. I was always tempted to do that, but it was fun. It was fun because I think we were going at 6:30 my time or something. So you and I would, or 6 o'clock maybe. So I'd get up at 4:30. Get my coffee or whatever, and then by 5 or 5:30 we'd hop on a call ourselves and go through, okay, this is what we're going to talk about today. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
It helps when you've got a beautiful Pacific Ocean view from your veranda, surely there, Fergus.
Yeah, it was tough on the butler getting him up to get the coffee ready, but yeah.
Yeah, and editing out the sound of waves in the background as well from the mansion.
So I'm keen to find out a stunningly broad question, because as you said, you did so many episodes, but what were you had some great conversations, and I've seen some incredible person did notes, 112 pages of notes that you've kindly shared with me, and it just sounds like some fascinating conversations that I'm assuming people can go back over and listen to. I'm saying that you might be about to say no, they can't, but we'll leave that one there for a second, and we'll find out in a minute. But I'd love to know your biggest takeaways for both of you from the conversations that you had. I know you had an audience that got involved and participated. So what one or two of the biggest takeaways for you, Cody, and then from you, Fergus?
Yeah, two things for me. One was, and I won't mention specifics necessarily, but I think it was a realization, and the realization was that, we talked about echo chamber earlier, in that, the more and more we did, and the more and more we talked, and we came up with new topics, and we took topics from the people that were tuning in and just talked about them, was that the realization for me was that coaches need help and support, and they need counsel, and they need new ideas. And like, we kind of thought, if we do this for a week or 2 weeks, we'll kind of, it'll run its course, and we probably won't be saying anything new, and everyone's read everything, and everyone's read Legacy, and everyone's read, this and that. And but the realization for me was that that's not necessarily the case. And so you can sit there on Twitter and think you don't have any new ideas, or you can read read your posts on LinkedIn, Dan, or something like that, and kind of be a bit deflated that you don't have new ideas, or you're not sharing anything of value. But what I realized was that as coaches, we need to collectively come together more often. We need to create space to share more often, because we take these things for granted. And so that was, I guess, a collective one. And then for me, the second piece was, as a young coach, to be able to sit with someone like Fergus for, if we did an hour at a time, we did 45 shows. For 45 hours, I got to sit there and pick Fergus's brain. And he'll hate this because he hates the focus being on him. But for someone like me at my age and my experience, to be able to sit there and get the distilled knowledge of 45 hours of Fergus Connolly, talk about coaching education. Like, that was the biggest coaching education I've had, and to get to then also disagree with him and and keep pushing each other and pushing our ideas and sharpening our ideas against each other. I certainly don't take that for granted, because that's such a wonderful opportunity to be able to get that mentorship and get that that distilled knowledge from him. That were the two things for me: the community, and then also just personally the ability to be able to sit with someone like Fergus for so long. It's not an hour over a coffee; it's like 45 hours.
Love that. And you're still talking to each other now, which is most impressive.
Oh man, after 45 hours, and you heard him, Dan. He still doesn't have a quote in this new book for me after 45 hours. What does that say? It was,
well, we're going to get on to talking about that, but yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed particularly the questioning, and to Cody's point, being able to disagree and weigh up different things. And a lot of it, I think, for me, it was helpful, to unpack questions and thoughts and perspectives, because when you're coaching, a lot of the time you're full on solving problems, and you don't get the opportunity to reflect and to collaborate. I think it's one of the biggest problems in sport, particularly in the West, where you're rushing, doing a lot of things, solving problems, moving on to the next thing. You've got this laundry list of things. Coaches don't get, or don't make the time, the opportunity to reflect and to organize their thoughts into models. And I think that, was really, really helpful. And it was great to learn, and get different perspectives and argue and debate over things, which again is something that's, everybody feels as though that they're right, and, somebody can't disagree with me or it makes me look bad, which, you know, is sad because then you don't truly learn. So it was wonderful. Like, I mean, 45 hours of it. I hadn't really thought of it in that sense, but yeah, it was a great experience. And I think the other challenge, which was a huge positive, was doing it regularly. It meant that, you know, you had to seriously think it through, each of the different topics that we were going to talk about and discuss, and how they built on others and how they related to the topics that had gone before.
Really interesting, guys. I mean, the three things I took out of that. So, you know, what you were saying is we spent 45 hours over the summer talking with an audience who were able to ask questions and contribute. Three things I took there is sharing promotes multiple lenses. And that's such an important thing to be able to share because, as you're saying, Cody, coaches need the opportunity to be able to listen to others, look at their challenges from multiple perspectives, and not get too entrenched in an echo chamber. The second thing I heard was probably from you there, Fergus, talking to learn. If we talk, if we have the opportunity to talk to each other, that actually promotes learning. And that leads into the third thing, which is that self-reflection. I think they go hand in hand. You know, for me, I always define self-skills as self-awareness, self-control, and self-reflection. And, you know, the more opportunities we get to talk to each other, to share ideas, to disagree respectfully, you know, the more chance we've got of learning, the more chance we've got of I suppose finding multiple solutions for our challenges and just being able to see the world differently, guys. I just think that's so important, isn't it?
Yeah. So many years ago, I forget, it could be almost 15 years ago now. I remember I created this forum, online forum, and I had this wonderful idea of inviting, you know, elite coaches only to contribute because, you know, I had a wonderful network of people who had helped me and learned, and I wanted to create this small, it was called the Elite Edge, and I invited all of these great coaches. I wanted them to come together and share ideas. And it was such a brilliant idea, and the website was done. It was really, really cool. And it was an absolute disaster. And when I reflected on it, and when I looked at why it didn't take off and why people didn't contribute and why, and you know, these coaches would log on, but and there was some contributions, but when I reflected on it and looked at some of the other sites that were incredibly successful, it was because it was elite. It was because you had so many people who had great ideas, but they didn't have anything to work with. And on other sites, you would have people maybe who would make statements who maybe weren't as experienced, and they would make statements that weren't quite accurate. And it gave a coach, a really experienced coach, an opportunity to critique or edit or add and build on it. And so you need different levels of experience and expertise to create that friction that builds learning. You just can't have so-called experts all of the time. You need lots of different layers, and I think that was one of the things that was incredibly helpful about the group. We had people with all kinds of backgrounds, either asking questions or mentioning books or bringing up something that I'd forgotten about and going, yes, that's exactly what it, or maybe just repeating it in a clearer, better way or using a different word. And that was the beauty of it. It was, we had people from so many different levels of experience and coaching. So that was a real advantage of doing it.
Yeah, and for head coaches as well, you know, there's always been this fear of sharing anything because you fear that you're giving away some sort of tactical advantage or competitive advantage to your opposition. And I think what we were able to do, particularly with head coaches who don't share, you know, the performance world shares, whereas the technical and tactical coaches refuse to share anything. But I think what we're able to do was move the needle a little bit on that and say, like, it's not about that anymore. Like the access to information has commoditized tactics as the advantage. Like everyone knows how to do a forward press. Like there are so many YouTube have made so much money off the gegenpress that like anyone in the world can coach that, including Aussie rules coaches. And I went home in January to Australia, and I went to 3 AFL clubs and sat with coaches there, and to a man, they told me, at our level we run about 80 to 90% of the same tactics. So the competitive advantage in the AFL is about 10% of tactics, and so you can give away the 80 or 90 other percent. There's no advantage there. Everyone's running the same stuff. Whereas what we're able to do, I think, for head coaches, and I'm building to a crescendo here, is start to have them think about that true peer review kind of scientific way of sharpening their knowledge, in that by putting ideas out into the world, it has so many different benefits. It does have that peer review element where people can build on top of it and make your idea better. It also acts as a recruiting tool for head coaches, particularly at the university level in North America, is they're always recruiting for new players, but there's no marketing that goes along with it. You're not showing any prospective players any of your program or how you think about the game. And so I think we started to move the needle there, and how that came about is it's been really cool to watch people that were on our calls start their own podcasts, start their own shows, start to talk about their coaching practice, just off the back of hearing someone like myself or someone like Fergus talk about it and talk about sharing and talk about, how games are actually won. I think that was really cool, and a really cool kind of added benefit that's really, really, I guess, heartwarming to see on the back end of it is others that have had the bravery to go and start a podcast and talk about their coaching. So one, they're going to get better. Two, they're sharing their ideas. And three, they're giving others opportunities to come through and build on top of their ideas as well. So I think we broke down a little bit of a wall there.
I love that. And what I was thinking there as both of you were speaking lines up with the what, the how, and the why. I think we get scared of sharing, or coaches can get scared of sharing the what, forgetting that it's actually the how that's the secret ingredient, right? It's not the what. It's the, you could argue maybe to a degree, a small percentage degree, it's what Pep Guardiola's game model, what Jurgen Klopp's game model, if we're going to use football here, soccer, what their game model looks like. They're figuring something out and they're like concocting something. It's like, yeah, I've got this great idea for a great game model. But the art of coaching, the craft of coaching, the secret of coaching is in the how. How do I deliver that? And it's difficult to the point of impossible to be able to actually figure out how Guardiola is delivering what he's delivering. So if Guardiola just shares with the world, hey, this is what I'm doing, I think it has, you don't lose out. He doesn't lose out in many respects because he's not necessarily sharing the how, which is so nuanced, it's unbelievable in terms of how he delivers his message, the conversations he's having, how he's using his members of staff, etc., etc. But he's also testing himself in terms of, well, I'm distributing this globally. And now, hey, I've got to go and create something else out of my principles of play. I've got to be even more ingenious. I've got to go out and be creative and inventive. So it's pushing you to be creative and inventive, to create something else, whilst really not giving away your secret sauce at all. Fergus, does that make sense, or have I gone off on one there?
No, I think, I remember one of the very first coaches I went to visit was Ashley Jones, strength coach for Canterbury Crusaders and the All Blacks, and this is when I was starting out. And I remember when I went down there, he one of the days he gave me a strength program, and I was shocked. He said, "Yeah, you can take this," and I said, "You serious?" And I thought, "Oh, this is like gold recipe." He said, "Yeah," and then he said, "I give this out to all of my competitors. Even," he said, "I share this with all of the strength coaches in New Zealand that we're playing against," and I was stunned because I thought at the time the strength program was like the keys to the kingdom. And he smiled and he said, "No," he said, "there's two things, Fergus, you got to remember. You don't have my capital, my players, my talent. And secondly," he said, you still have to implement it. And so you can know what somebody's planning to do, but you still have to coach it, the art of coaching, and you still have to have the talent. Now, that said, there are some systems and there will always be some things that are a competitive advantage, and they're from time to time. But I think what is most interesting are the things that people choose to think are competitive advantages. And one of the things that is just complete myth is the idea of some of the technologies and some of the really quantifiable aspects. I think that's just an eternal ongoing joke as far as I'm concerned, where you can simply quantify, because there's a rush to believe that we can put this magic metric on a human or on an aspect of human performance, and that's this God particle, to use Cody's term, and that doesn't exist. It's the combination of all of those things. And one of the other things I think that people do miss is spending time with older coaches who have a lot of experience and learning from them. I think there's a lot of great young coaches out there, but the number of older retired coaches who are around and who sometimes are visiting teams, those people are walking universities. And I often see coaches like stroll by them, or those are the guys that I learned so much from, because not only have they obviously done it, but they've learned and they've had this window to reflect on the good and bad. And which, after time, many of them will say things like, one thing I wish I'd done a little bit differently, or, at this stage I would have done this. Like, that stuff that's incredible. Those are the people you really learn from.
Interesting. One of the things that you spoke about in an episode that really interests me, largely because a lot of what I do is at what I would describe to be the competitive level, which would be the adult elite level perhaps, and the adult or the developing elite level. You spoke about competitive advantage. And I think what's great today is, obviously, I'm a sports psych. Fergus, sports science is your main thing, head of performance roles, and Cody, obviously, a coach, a head coach. So it would be interesting to get different viewpoints in terms of having a competitive advantage. So I've got my thoughts and feelings about this. What one or two things organizations or teams can do to create a competitive advantage, but I'd love to tap into the knowledge you guys have, or your thoughts, your opinions. If you were brought into a sports organization or a team, let's say at the adult elite level, so the professional level, what one or two things would you do in terms of helping them have a competitive advantage? What do you think is out there that's so vitally important that they can do better? Given that you don't know their landscape, we're just hypothesizing. What do you think is vital out there from a competitive perspective? Cody, do you want to kick us off? Or
Sure. Well, as you well know, Dan, and thanks for teeing this up. I mean, competitive advantage is my landscape, not just from a head coaching perspective, but obviously a lot of my writing tracks back to competitive advantage. And I think about this on a number of different levels. So I'll start with the organizational level. I think, and maybe this is a theme that we've kind of been skirting around in what we've been talking about, from an organizational level, we have copycat syndrome. And, to pull back to what Fergus was talking about at the moment, that is, everyone's got this technology. They've got this, they've got this thing that's measuring this thing that is going to give us, X percent. And where, Pep's doing this, so we've got to do that as well. And that is kind of rife across the elite elements of sport right now. But I actually don't think that gives rise to competitive advantage. I think what gives rise to competitive advantage is this idea of, it's not about what they have, it's about having what we have, but better. I'll say that again. It's not about having what they have, it's about having what we have, but better. So how do we sharpen our own axe? And again, that's an organizational philosophy. This probably can't just be confined to the inner sanctum of the team. This comes from an alignment from the owner or the football director or the CEO or whoever it is at the top of the pyramid, the top of the traditional organizational hierarchy, right the way down through the coach, through the quarterback, whoever those foundational pieces are, or, we call them kind of cultural architects or whatever you want to call them, the people that actually matter in terms of shaping the organization, they need to be aligned on this. So what do we have? What are our potential competitive advantages? Because I can tell you, if you want to compete on left and right backs who can run like Benjamin Mendy and use the ball like Zinchenko, you are going to lose that battle every single time. Every single time. So, like, what is it that your organization brings to the table? And there are some that do this really, really well. I speak a lot about Southampton. If you want to use a Premier League example, I think their organizational philosophy on developing talent and it being about Southampton, I think is globally one of the examples that we should be looking at in terms of creating that competitive advantage. And then the second piece of that would be the team itself, the inner sanctum, and what we're doing. So, yeah, like you said, Dan, I mean, this could be called the TTPP show. Like we've got all four squares here, and we get to play around with tech and tack and physiology and psychology. But I think ultimately, from a competitive advantage landscape right now, is connection.
Okay.
And there's really, if you wanted to break that down even further, and I don't want this to be a lecture. I didn't bring my slides with me, but I think there's two elements to this. There's connection amongst the playing group and amongst the inner sanctum. So what are we doing to facilitate human to human connection within the team itself? I think that is a huge element, and it's not, unfortunately, I love James and he's been on my show, but sweeping the sheds isn't the thing, right? Like, again, copying what the All Blacks do and sweeping the sheds and thinking that you've got a great culture and that everyone's connected, or copying Pop and taking everyone out for a wine dinner. It's not authentic. It's just copying someone else because it was written in a book, or there was a Sports Illustrated article. It's the same concept. What do we have and how do we do that better rather than doing what Pep does, what Pop does? And then the second element to that connection is really on the head coach. And this is what I've started talking about and writing about more recently, is connection to self and the space and the ability to deal with emotional baggage that comes along with being a human being, and then the pressures, the tough stuff that comes along with being a head coach. So who are you as a head coach? Because you create yourself in your team. So if you are just this separated, unattached, unemotional, just blob, I don't think you can really create any of that connection within the team either. And so you're going to get left behind on that front. So, yeah, so from an organizational perspective, stop copying what everyone else is doing and look at what you have. From a team perspective, stop copying what everyone else is doing and look at what you have. And from a coaching perspective, start looking at yourself and understand that you create yourself in your team.
Before you dive in, Fergus, I just want to reflect back some of the things I heard there, Cody. I heard authenticity within your cultural landscape. Don't look elsewhere and necessarily copy. And I think that connection can be very, very subtle. I remember working with one team and somebody complaining about what we were doing being forced fun. So it's got to be authentic, and it's got to be probably devised and designed with the players, co-created with the players. I heard this notion of self-skills, especially the self-awareness piece. I heard emotion with reference to teamship and relationship, and what came through there quite loudly was that notion of relationship, connection. And again, all of those things would come under the psychosocial component. I love that.
Well, that's the competitive landscape now. And you speak to any head coach and at the elite levels, and they'll mirror that. And the reason that we need to do work on this is because that's not what we were taught. We don't come from a society that allowed us to learn about ourselves. In fact, we come from a society that in the West taught us to suppress those elements of ourselves. And so I think the biggest shortcut to competitive advantage right now, and we can probably touch on this a little bit later, but I think that the greatest delta in terms of where you can see performance gains is actually sitting in the head coach and unlocking the head coach and who they are and what they're about and who they are as a human being, more so than whether you have, overlapping central defenders.
Well said. I agree, mate. Fergus, fire away.
I'm just thinking back to a team that NFL team spent a few weeks with this summer, and when you asked about competitive advantage, you have to start with the organization themselves and what they have. And so when you talk about authenticity, to Cody's point, you just can't go in and sweep the sheds, because you just do that's the action, but you've no idea of what the actual principle or purpose was behind a particular thing. And that's what I think so many people miss. They see a technique or they see an outcome, but that's not the reason. Like, what was the rationale? What was the reason? What's the purpose? And you may find that it's something completely different for you. And that's what I think so many people miss. So many people just choose to take a superficial option. Oh, this is what, Ronaldo or Messi, they all eat a banana every morning. Oh, well, then it's bananas are the secret. You know what I mean? It's not that simple, and you have to understand why and the reason behind it. And in many cases, just copying what some other team or somebody else is doing can be a disadvantage for you. The other thing is sequencing and prioritizing what's important for the organization at that moment in time. So if you go and watch, Manchester City, and you see Manchester City do this wonderful warm-up drill, and you go back to your club or you start doing it, City might have had 3 or 4 basic iterations before they got to that drill and built up to that. But you're going to go in and just copy that team at that level without knowing what it took to get there. And again, not even knowing the talent they have. And I think that's one of the mistakes. Probably the 2 biggest mistakes that I see, or the 2 greatest opportunities for competitive advantage in any organization, is one, improving the communication within the organization as it is, because in many professional teams, you have a huge staff right now, and communication very often is quite poor. And secondly, then it's improving the synergy and collaboration between the experts you have there and then continuing to develop them, rather than just growing your backroom team bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's about optimizing the staff, the systems, and the processes that you have. Those are the two things that can offer immediate competitive advantage. I had a GM last week call me, and there was about a particular hire, and they wanted to check on someone, but we were talking about that. It was about the collaboration. Would this person fit into the organization? Would they improve everybody else, or were they going to need a lot of time management themselves? That was what was important to him. And so it's about improving the collaboration and the communication among the staff.
Let me ask you about that, Fergus. If somebody is really good at their job, like they're a really good sports scientist, they have a lot of domain-specific knowledge, they bring something to the table that might be extraordinary within that knowledge base. Is it the end of the world that they have to deal with? And let's just say that person at first glance doesn't necessarily seem like somebody who would easily fit into our organization, our shared values, for example, that this person might be a slight outlier. Is that the end of the world? Does that mean that person cannot join our organization? Isn't it incumbent on an organization to be robust enough and nimble enough to deal with individual differences? I suppose yes, I understand shared values. Yes, I understand similarities and perhaps recognize where similarities and the sharing of, say, values and behaviors and beliefs are important for the cohesion of a culture, for an organization. But I also recognize that actually, surely we have to be nimble enough to be able to deal with individual differences. Surely if somebody is that good at what they do, if they bring in that much expertise, that we can accommodate that person.
Absolutely. I think there are two things. I think that there are one or two values that are non-negotiable. So you're not going to hire a sociopath, or you would prefer not to, or someone that you can't trust. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that absolutely you do want people who will bring more creative and often disagreeable thoughts to the table. And the last point on that is I've always had this ratio of 1:15. And that just comes from one or two organizations I've been around where you can afford to carry one or two people who may not be, maybe need a certain amount of maturity or whatever. You can carry 1:15 if the culture is strong enough to keep them and to draw them and to actually pull them into that culture and keep them there, and they will develop over time. But if you've got any more than that, it's almost impossible to. And so, in other words, most likely 2 or 3 guys who have that X factor and just need a certain amount of maturity or lifestyle skills. And I saw it first actually with a rugby team. I remember they had 2 guys who, struggled off the field with issues, but were incredible players. And actually, at their core, were good people. They were just struggling with other things. One of them was definitely a maturity issue. And anyway, all of those kinds of things. So that's my take on it. I think, yes, and I think it's dangerous if you look for clones. In fact, you want to have people who will disagree with you, because on the other end of that continuum, as you know, Dan, you just end up with people who are yes men, and nobody's going to disagree with you. And then all of a sudden, the emperor has no clothes, and you're surrounded by sycophants. And the most dangerous combination is a sociopathic leader and a sycophantic backroom team, because it's not, that's dangerous. You're never going to win anything, but it'll be a glorious failure. But you've seen that. So when it comes to recruiting, Cody and I have spoken a lot about this. When it comes particularly to recruiting staff, you need people who bring diverse backgrounds and specialities to the group. But just the last point on that, I'm a huge believer in bringing in people to upskill the staff that I have and to ensure that they all rise together. You know, that's very, very important, particularly with psychology, because that to me is sometimes it's difficult. I feel sorry for many psychologists who are brought into organizations without a true understanding from the organization of what they can offer and how they can offer it. And I see incredible opportunity for psychologists to upskill the staff across the board, not simply come in and work one-on-one. You can't work one-on-one with maybe 250 people in the building if you include coaches and players. But what you can do is you can upskill coaches to help support you, and then you can deal with the one or two really extreme cases. You know, that's how I would do it. But this idea of just one-to-one all the time, I just see psychology particularly completely mismanaged. I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah, no, I look. I mean, that's that could take us down a rabbit hole. I mean, what I've heard you say there is yes, cognitive and cultural diversity is important. We could carry one or two outliers if the culture is strong enough.
Mm-hmm.
What you also made me think of there is something called the dark triad of personality, which consists of Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism. And basically, what you're saying, Fergus, is stay away from people who would score high on that dark triad. No Machiavellianism, no psychopathy, no narcissism is what you're saying. But cognitive and cultural diversity.
Yeah, and recognizing that we're all on that scale, but it's not the the clinical absolute definition. And then you'd be amazed at how many organizations have no idea what you're actually talking about there. And that's so fundamental to being successful.
And that's a mainstream scale as well. It sounds somewhat dark and evil and dodgy, but that's a dark triad of personality is actually an organizational psychology scale that some organizations use.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think when you can understand that and get that right, and the irony is with many coaches, it takes time to develop that awareness as a person, not just as a coach. To be able to build that and put that kind of team and group together.
I want to crack on and talk about both of your books in a minute, but I'd be really interested to hear from both of you in terms of, this is obviously the Sports Psych show, what you think the most important psychological skill or psychological factor is in either competitive or participative sport. You can choose, whether it's at the top level, youth level, grassroots, I don't mind. But what do you believe is the most important psychological skill, Cody?
For the players or for the coaches or what?
For human beings in a performance environment.
Identity.
Okay.
For both players and coaches.
Interesting. I like that. Why identity? Psychological factor of identity. Why that?
Because I think it unlocks so many different elements, and a lot of the elements that we've talked about today. Communication and openness to being challenged, and flexibility of thinking, and emotional agility. And these are really all at the core of both athletic performance, what we ask our players and athletes to do, but also what I call high performance knowledge work, which is what coaches do, in that we are hired and employed for our brains. And so I see the fundamental element of that being our identity and who we are and what we stand for. And the knock-on effect that the coaches have on the players, obviously I described this before, is that you create yourself in your team. And so if you don't understand your identity, or you're not working towards understanding your identity, I think that it's a huge roadblock for everyone involved in the team.
Interesting. I agree. Again, the self-awareness piece. Know thyself to be able to engage, progress, participate, perform.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, it's confronting. Like we're dealing at the, kind of astrological level of like why we're here and what am I about, and my role in the world and how I perceive the world. And again, we have not been socialized for any of that. We come from the big boys don't cry generation, and so and if women are crying, it's because they're way too emotional. Like those are the two kind of opposite pieces, right? So neither of those things are true. But I think figuring out that puzzle piece, or aiming to try to figure out that puzzle piece, is where we need to go to unlock performance in general. Like I see this as having flow-on effects to physiology and what Fergus is talking about, and injury rehabilitation and all these different things. I think you could probably start it, if you're looking for one nugget, at human identity.
Fergus?
Which is the most important quality?
Quality, skill, psychological factor, anything you'd like.
I think awareness, which I think ties to Cody. I think understanding who you are, I think is the most important. I think that being able to recognize and having the awareness of what your strengths and I don't like using the word weaknesses, but what your opportunities are. I think that's the most important, because that allows you recognize yourself with reference to the context, society, the situation you find yourself in, knowing how you can manage it, navigate it, and adapt to that situation. Because the most important skill is adaptability, the ability to adapt, grow, learn, which is the essence of resilience.
Yeah.
And that's critical. People, I think, sometimes we have this perception that, we were supposed to learn X number of skills in youth and that's it and we're finished. It's not. It's a constant series of, we're always learning. And I think, as you grow older, you learn how to learn. One of the things about the education system, I think one of the failings perhaps, is that we don't encourage, critical thinking, problem solving as much now. It's still even more rote learning, particularly actually as you get older. It's learn X, Y, and Z. You go to the exam and you have to just repeat X, Y, and Z, rather than, like, the role of education is to teach you, is not to teach you something, but to teach you how to teach yourself that particular thing. So, for example, a language, you learn the basics, but then you learn how to continue to learn. Same with math, whatever it might be. And so having that awareness is fundamental to developing resilience, adaptability, all of those things.
It's really interesting, the two skills, you could call them factors, components that you've come up with, identity and awareness. My one would be attention. I think attention is absolutely vital on and off the pitch or the field. The capacity to direct attention, have flexible attention. I think we so often become what we attend to about ourselves. And so the ability to be flexible there, be nimble, I just think is absolutely vital. And I think identity is influenced by attention, and I think awareness is influenced by attention. So attention is the one for me. And you can fine-grain that and take it onto the pitch, or the court, or the course. In game, being a great competitor is having, for me, the capacity to pay attention to what you're doing. I think that's vital. Don't know if you guys have any thoughts on attention, but I think it's such an important skill.
Yeah, I think it's at the core of, particularly at developing awareness. And I think it's interesting because with meditation and so many other things, that's what they're essentially trying to encourage is that attention. But meditation or many of these other skills, breathing, breath work, they don't, they're vehicles to allow that, and they don't work for necessarily everybody. I know people who get their best meditation when they go for a run, or they're working out, or they're doing what they enjoy the most. That's where they, find themselves most aware.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. And again, I think one opportunity for us all is to, and you do this really well, Dan, is to actually start to rethink even some of these words. Attention, funnily enough, brings attention to, a particular thing for different people. And, I think there's opportunities for us to even rethink how we perceive attention. I think there's opportunities for us to rethink how we perceive communication. Because ultimately what shapes us and our view of the world is the language that we use, right? Both from a self-talk perspective, but then also how we communicate out into the world and have some sort of social interaction. And so, I think a lot of these things that we talk about, and maybe this is one of the things that hit home with the sessions that Fergus and I did, was we even started with, well, what are we talking about here? When we talk about communication, what are we actually talking about? Well, let's define it. Let's go back and define it. And what you end up doing there is you start to realize that there's things missing, or there's things that are perceived in a particular way because of the way it's studied in academia, which isn't necessarily the way that it should be interpreted in a practical sense. So like communication, for instance, and, the 5 general kind of forms of communication. There's way more than those 5, but we just think about, verbal, non-verbal, written, yada, yada, yada. And so we go and try to change those skills. There's probably other avenues we could, to your point, Dan, pay attention to in terms of communication, for instance. So, I think there's opportunities for us there to really even dive into, what are we talking about here? Like, what are we paying attention to, and why? And is this the optimal way for us to even think about some of these terms that we tend to just gloss over?
Yeah, as you're speaking there, I mean, I go back to Fergus's point about, competitive advantage in an organization is part of that is asking, why are we doing what we're doing? And I like your idea there, Cody, of kind of defining what you're talking about. If we're going to talk about communication, what is communication? What are we doing? How are we doing it? Why are we doing it in the way that we're doing it? The word that's coming through to me is clarity. That high performance really is mediated by clarity. No question there. Just a thought, just a random thought, trying to bring it all together.
I think that's tweetable. that have a little. Well, what did you say? High performance is mediated by clarity. That's a quotable, tweetable Dan Abrahamsism.
Well, I just think, just trying to piece this together a little bit. Again, it seems to come down to the what, the how, and the why so often. What are we actually trying to do here? How are we trying to do it? Why are we doing it in this way? And if we go back to what we were talking about earlier, having these conversations, broadening our lens, both of those enable us to broaden and deepen maybe our what, broaden and deepen our how, and tune into our why. That's kind of what I'm thinking here.
Yeah, I agree. And, to kind of bundle all these things together is that, I think what gets in the way of that is what Fergus touched on earlier, which is one of the themes that kind of came out of our conversations, is often we think, particularly in high performance environments, is that one of these things is the God particle. So the answer to that is that none of them are. It's the synergy between them. It's the synergies between the communication and the organizational vision and the human beings that are in the roles that we have, and all of these different things, the analysis, the data, the yada yada yada. It's actually the seams between them that create that competitive advantage. Whereas what we have at the moment is we have technical coaches thinking they have the God particle. We have certainly the S&C community thinking they have the God particle. Certainly, at the moment, the analytics guys thinking they have it. and it's just drawing all of these different environments apart rather than creating that clarity that you're talking about, Dan, where at a certain point, everyone needs to admit their thing isn't the God particle. It's actually all of them together that creates the high performance environment.
Talking about the God particle, and clearly the God particle resides in sports psychology more so than any other department. But talking about the God particle, Fergus, your book. I want to spend
what a segue.
The last 10 minutes.
Speaking of God particles, what a segue. That's the best I've ever had.
I've pulled it out of the bag at last. It's been we've been going for about an hour, and I wanted to pull something out of the bag. So your book, which you very kindly sent to me, the Happiness Handbook for High Achievers. So it's an autobiography for yourself, high achiever. Themes. I've picked out some themes, mate, and I'd like you to pick one to have a little bit of a conversation about. I'll throw them out there. So, perception of control. These all sort of themes within the book. Perception of control, wolves versus sheepdogs, your purpose and values, leading the individual. Humans are complex, adaptive organisms. Very cybernetic of you there. Foundations of well-being. Refuse to be a victim. Win or learn. Striving for contentment. Throw us some God particle knowledge our way.
Let's start with the first one.
Perception of control.
Yeah, I think that's something that's something I had to learn, I guess. And again, yeah, like you mean the book is probably a series of lessons that I've learned over the years and learned from others, but in particular I think with high achievers in different areas, we prepare exceptionally well, and then when you're successful, you start to perhaps believe that you're in control of certain situations when you confuse that with having prepared exceptionally well, for example. And I think that's something that we forget from time to time. We were successful because we had prepared very well, and things went our way, and we won and we were successful. Sometimes we confuse that with being in control of everything, and you're never truly in control, and being able to understand that and recognize that is very, very important. It allows you to navigate wins and losses, ups and downs as you go through life. And I think that was something that, again, that I'd forgotten maybe, had to learn, because when you develop really good skill sets and you become better and better, it's very easy to fall into that mindset that you're in complete control and you can find the answer or have the answer. The reality is you're never in control. You're just very, very well prepared, and you have to keep that front of mind so that you don't become complacent or misguided.
Yeah, I think perception of control is important. I mean, when I read that part of the book, I was really thinking about, again, going back to the adult elite level, the professional level.
Mm-hmm.
I just think so many, perhaps coaches, but definitely players, strive for control in areas that they're just not going to be able to control, and it lends towards a great deal of unhappiness.
Yes.
Whereas if they're able to let go a little bit and say, okay, look, these things I just cannot control these things. So let's focus on these things over here that are more within my control. It will make an enormous difference to their performance, an enormous difference to their capacity to manage their emotions through good and bad performances, and just make a difference to their, as you know, that's what the book is about, their happiness, their contentment, if you like.
Yeah, and even down just in life in general, like, I mean, just look at elections, COVID, all of those different types of things. There's a lot of things you're not in control of, and being able to recognize which you are. And ultimately, like I say in the book, the only thing you're really in control of is your response to life events. And I distinguish, I think, in the book as well, the difference between a reaction and a response. You know, a lot of people react instinctively to things without thinking through, as opposed to responding with just a little bit of thought and recognition of where they are. And I think it's I think it's an incredible skill that takes time to develop.
I agree, but I think what you've said there at the end is actually what a lot of coaches don't always appreciate in the world of sport, is that to respond effectively and optimally is a skill, and it takes a great deal of self-control, self-regulation. That takes a great deal of time to be able to develop those skills. They're not easy things to be able to accomplish. We can choose to respond in certain ways, but it becomes easier to choose in, say, positive, practical ways to adversity with skills, with mental skills, with competitive skills, with self skills, essentially.
Yeah, and that goes back to, like you said, attention. Like Cody spoke about identity and having that awareness, of truly who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to quiz you before we get on to Cody's upcoming book. I love what you said at the end, striving for, this was at the end of the book, striving for contentment rather than happiness. I agree, but I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so that it's kind of a paradox, the book in itself, because the book isn't really about happiness, as I talk about. It's really about striving for contentment, because so go on Instagram today and everybody's happy. Like, I mean, everybody's living their best life, and getting out of a Ferrari, sun shining with your triple shot pumpkin latte or whatever. Ciardo and being held by the valet. Like, it doesn't. That's not, like, life isn't just this. You reach this point, it's just happiness the whole way through. It's about contentment. It's about recognizing what makes you truly content. And that, as the book takes you on this journey of understanding who you are and being authentic with who you are, not worrying about your image, but yes, you're going to have ups and downs, but being able to navigate those, that's the goal, and having that level of contentment. And what does that mean? Like, knowing who you are, knowing what your purpose is, being loved, and what does love mean? I think the most important thing for anybody in life is to feel necessary and feel valued. That is at the core of love. That's there's so many different variations of love, but at its core is knowing that you're contributing to something or to somebody. That's that's really what is at its core. So that's what the book, really, that's what I wanted to explore, particularly, like I say, for high achievers, and in society today, where it's, get up at 4:30, work, all day long, and grind and hustle and all of that. To be honest, nonsense, because that's not what life is really about, and that's not what success is. But it all starts with, again, having the awareness or understanding your definition of success, and that can only come from you. It can't come from somebody else.
Can I just tell you how unhappy I would be in life if I was drinking a triple shot pumpkin latte?
The trick is you have to be getting out of the Ferrari with the perfectly placed triple shot pumpkin spice latte with the sun in the background in Miami. That's the trick, according to Instagram.
I'd take the Ferrari, but not the triple pumpkin shot thing. No way. Cody, you'd have to be made of tough stuff if you're going to have a triple shot pumpkin latte. So I don't know if you talk about it in your upcoming book, The Tough Stuff. Do you talk about triple shot pumpkin lattes?
No, we do not. But maybe I could add it in.
Okay, so that's not what The Tough Stuff is about.
You get a free one with every book. There's my quote, front cover. Contact Fergus.
Call this number for your latte.
You might actually get included in the book now, mate. Nice. Cody, this is an upcoming book, hot off the press, The Tough Stuff. Tell me about it, mate. What delights have we got in store when we open up The Tough Stuff?
Well, I don't know if it'll necessarily be delightful, but it'll be realistic. And I guess the easiest way to sum it up is the subtitle, so what others won't tell you about being a head coach in elite sport. And we've covered a little bit of this kind of throughout the conversation, but what struck me was that we never hear about the human experience of head coaching. Or if we do, it's, in the kind of swept around in an autobiography, which has its own set of problems because they are reserved for, the elite winners. And so we don't really have this picture of a realistic picture of what it's like to be a head coach in elite sport. And so I saw it as this missing piece of the puzzle. And what we have right now is kind of survivorship bias, is we just listen to those who win and don't factor in anything else about the hardships that particularly head coaches go through. So I wanted to isolate that piece. I'm going very narrow. Head coaches in elite sport. Okay. And covering really the emotional toll that is taken on these people.
Yeah, interesting. And what range of topics do you actually cover, mate?
Yeah, so the book's broken into two sections, and the first section is really the tough stuff. And so, we're talking about identity, like we mentioned earlier. The fact that a lot of head coaches are just thrown in, very little preparation. And even if they've done their badges and they've done this, or they're a lifelong assistant coach, there are things that hit you on day 1 or day 20 or day 200 where you kind of sit there and nod your head, shake your head and like, oh my God, I didn't know about this. Or, there's all sorts of things, just the general kind of toll that is taken on people. Like consider this, like you're away from family, there's no job security, very little connection because you're not sure even if your social networks want to be friends with you or because you're in the newspaper or on the television. You've got all this pressure of caring about, 50 players and then another 200 staff. You're sleep deprived. In North America, you might play a game in 3 different time zones in the same week. It's lonely. Like Eddie Jones talks about this a lot, the loneliness of head coaching, being separated even from your assistant coaches because you dictate their career. Everyone thinks you're an idiot. You can be in the example that I give is it's easier to become a United States state governor than it is to become an NBA head coach, in that there are 50 jobs for the governors and there's 30 jobs for the NBA coaches. But everyone immediately thinks you're an idiot. And that's just baffling into itself. And it's not lost on these people that everyone thinks they're an idiot. And that's not just outsiders. It's a lot of the time, it's the people within the organization as well. Again, we've talked about how everyone thinks they have the God particle, and that is a weight that is applied to particularly the head coach. And it kind of leads to even like dehumanization. 2 of the coaches that I've interviewed have been sacked whilst I've been writing the book. And just watching the the degradation, the dehumanization on Twitter alone, and the comments about these are human beings, the families, and pride, and they know better than anyone else that they've let people down and they've let their team down and they haven't won and they haven't succeeded. And some of the things that you read, again, it's going to be confronting and realistic. It's not this, pretty picture of, and then we went and won this, this cup and everything was great. It's actually what the human experience is. And then, the second portion is my solution and how head coaches can start to prepare themselves to deal with a lot of these issues. Because, no one tells you about them when you're coming up, or you can't really experience them. Again, it's impossible to replicate sitting in front of a press conference, almost every day, like a Gareth Southgate, or if you're the head coach of the Yankees. You literally have to explain to the world what you did that day every single day. There's nothing that can prepare you for that, but you can start to take steps to, create an easier environment, or an environment that allows you to thrive personally rather than always feeling like you're chasing.
Sounds fascinating, mate. I'm really, really looking forward to reading that. When's it out?
January 14th. On Amazon.
Okay. You hesitated?
I might need an extra week, but we'll see. No, January 14th. I will use the whip to make sure that my editor is on time.
You'll need a few triple shot pumpkin lattes to get yourself through.
There's going to be some late nights, I can assure you of that.
Let me tell you a story about just a head coach, just to illustrate. I'm not going to name him because he's well known, but so we're meeting in hotel lobby with a group of his assistant coaches, and this guy, very well known, but again, just underlying the loneliness. So we're all sitting in the afternoon and we're chatting, and I wasn't working with him at the time. I'd been brought in, I think, to give a talk to the coaches or something. And so anyway, later on afterwards, we're sitting in the lobby, everybody's having just a glass of wine, and it's early enough in the day. We're just chatting, just sharing stories, and all's going well. And everybody's sitting in a circle. I'm sitting two away from the head coach, and I glance over maybe after about an hour, and I notice a small trickle of blood coming from inside the head coach's ear. And I look around. Has nobody else noticed this? And I don't work with the guy, but he has had a stroke like a year or two beforehand. And I'm looking around at everybody. Everybody was too scared to say anything to the coach until finally he felt it and went, "Oh, sugar, I cut myself shaving." How he managed to cut himself there, I don't know. But everybody was so intimidated and fearful of the coach. Nobody wanted to point out the fact that he was bleeding from like inside his ear, and yet they were so scared of him. And yet, obviously, would have been somewhat concerned for him. But when you're a head coach, you are lonely. It is that lonely at the top. And I've worked with teams where you got assistant coaches who are actively campaigning for your job while you're in that hot seat. So it's not even just the public; it's even within your own staff. It's it is definitely a lonely job.
And they actively look. What I've found historically is head coaches are actually actively looking for advisors, mentors, who aren't actively looking to take over their job. So somebody like myself as a sports psychologist, I can be quite useful in that respect, because there's no way I'm taking over a head coach of a rugby team or a head coach of a football team. That's just impossible. So it's when somebody's from the outside and not that threatening, it's actually quite a useful ally for these head coaches, these managers to have.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Well, and what Fergus talked about earlier, right? Where there's these retired coaches that are looking for something to do, and like Fergus said, are just a wealth of knowledge and have been there and done it. I think from that perspective as well, is there's outlets that we don't tend to think about, or we tend to write off those kind of older coaches who've been there, done that, and it was the previous day, and they're not going to be that useful. Whereas if there was that ability for them to act as mentors and be formalized in those kind of roles, like maybe they would transition out of head coaching earlier, knowing that they had something to go to, rather than holding on for dear life and coaching their 27th team when you know that they're at the end of their line from a coaching perspective. So I think there's all sorts of structural things that we could do there as well that would actually be really, really advantageous for the people that are currently on the hot seat.
Absolutely.
I was fortunate one night. I was in a hotel. I was with Tony Smith, and I think Roy Keane had just spoken with the team. So it's Tony Smith. He was with Warrington Wolves at the time. So after the team meeting or whatever, we're just sitting in the hotel lobby. Brian Noble was visiting, and he stopped in to talk to Tony. Martin O'Neill was there was he with Leicester at the time? No, he was retired actually. He had been at a game. So you had Tony Smith, Brian Noble, Martin O'Neill just sitting in the corner of the hotel, and they were just chatting, and Muggins here was sitting with them. And it was just fascinating listening to these guys. I don't think Brian or Martin, they were both retired. Tony was still coaching, but or they weren't coaching at that time. And it was brilliant listening to them sharing ideas, sharing stories, talking about failure, talking about fear, and it was just a chance meeting of three incredible minds, and talking about their thoughts on the loneliness. And then the other one was doubt, and just hearing them talking about how do you struggle to sleep at night when you make certain decisions and that. And one of them was saying that was the big thing that would keep him awake. And then others were talking about, no, I don't this is how I justify it. And they were sharing, they were all learning from one another. There's so many great lessons. But I think you reach a point as well in coaching. Well, not everybody does, or some it takes longer, but you realize you are not the most important person. And, there's so many things you can learn from other coaches, and you learn so much from getting the opportunity to share with great, authentic people.
Fascinating. Guys, awesome stuff. Conscious of your time. So I think we'll probably wrap it up. I'd be interested to know, Fergus, where we can get your book from and how people can find you.
It comes free with Cody's on January 14th. Amazon. It'll be the same as Cody's. Get it on Amazon.
2 for the price of 1.
Get it before Cody's comes out. I'm really looking forward to reading yours, Cody. I know that Cody's been keeping me in the loop on this journey, and his enthusiasm and excitement is infectious. So I don't want to ask for an early copy, but I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Well, I'm really looking forward to my early copy before Christmas, Cody. So
I think it's fair to say you'll both be on the Christmas list. You've both been good this year, so.
Good stuff. Listen, before we go, how can people follow you? What's your Twitter handle, Cody, and what's yours, Fergus?
Yeah, CodyRoyle.com is for all books and blogs and podcast, everything up there in one centralized place, and then at Cody Royle, very easy to find on every social media platform with a name like mine. So, at Cody Royle.
Brilliant. Fergus?
FergusConnolly.com, and I think it's Fergus_Connolly at Twitter. But just FergusConnolly.com. Links are all there. Dan, thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure, as always. It's been too long. We should need to do this more often.
We should. This should be an annual Sports Psych show celebration. An Englishman, Irishman, and Aussie get together and talk. I'm not gonna swear. Talk BS for an hour and a half.
That's what would have happened in the bar anyway, wouldn't it? That's the end of the joke. Is that an Aussie, an Irishman, and an Englishman walk into a bar and just talk BS, and then they go home.
Guys, thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure, Dan. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Thanks to you both. Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast. And I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.